Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod, a critical, historically important week for the president.
Well, I tell you what, Dark Brandon's coming back. He's here.
As calls for Joe Biden to step aside from running for re-election intensify in his own party. Axios' Mike Allen joins us.
However bad the public conversation is for President Biden, I can tell you the behind the scenes, it's worse.
And the AI tailwinds that are picking up a 173-year-old company, Corning Glass. CEO Wendell Weeks, in a rare interview, explaining his role in our newest technology.
We're the connectivity that brings the hardware to life.
Those stories plus Paramount has a love match, maybe, for now. The EU's tight grip on big tech, and Boeing agrees to plead guilty to a felony charge for deadly crashes.
We have seen the first roach, then second roach, then a bunch of roaches, and just nonstop. And is this the last roach, do you think?
I hope. It's Monday, July 8th, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan. Andrew is off today. Joe's here.
I am here, and you're here.
You are. And I'm here.
Today.
Two of us. Yes, today.
Today.
The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ closed at record highs once again on Friday. Stocks have started July on a tear. The Dow's actually up by 0.2%. The S&P is up by 2%, and the NASDAQ is up by 3.5%. And what's the date today? Just the 8th, right?
Yeah.
A partial day of trading and a closed day last week, too. So that's some pretty big gains in a very short period of time.
The NASDAQ, especially.
For the NASDAQ, especially. Some breaking news overnight. Boeing agreeing to plead guilty to a criminal fraud charge tied to the fatal 737 MAX crashes. This comes months after U.S. prosecutors say that the company violated a 2021 settlement that shielded it from prosecution. Under the plea deal, Boeing will pay a fine of more than $243 million and invest at least $455 million in compliance and safety programs. An independent compliance monitor will be installed at the company during a probationary period of 3 years. This deal requires the approval of a federal judge. You do have families of the victims from those crashes from 5 years ago complaining pretty bitterly about this. Boeing also agreeing that its board of directors will meet with crash victims' family members. The deal brands Boeing a felon and could complicate its ability to sell products to the U.S. government. That's of issue when you start looking at the defense products that it provides to the government. Shares of Boeing this morning up just barely, up by over $1 over the 5-year period since that those crashes took place. You're talking about a drop of 47% in its shares.
Yeah. You wonder whether this is this, people on a downward decline, they reach a moment of clarity is what they call it, and in that people that
hitting rock bottom,
things like that, hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it's like a horrible accident or jail or something like that. Is this it? Is this? I mean, we have seen the first roach, then second roach, then a bunch of roach, and just nonstop. And is this the last roach? Do you think?
I hope. I hope. I mean, the good news in this deal is if they're spending more than $450 million on safety and compliance, they're going to be watching that much more closely. I think it sends a very clear message, and one that shareholders will hear pretty loudly, that you want to make sure that safety and compliance are first, second, and third on the order of business.
Right. Maybe this is it. Which, Boeing, be good if we could say, gosh, Boeing, great American company.
Very important.
Yeah, it is. Late last night, I swear I've read this 6 times already in the last 6 months. Skydance Media and Paramount Global announced they'd reached the deal to merge. Sherry Redstone will sell the family's controlling stake in the company. It's a complex transaction that will culminate in a merger. The breakthrough came after Skydance sweetened its offer to the Redstone family for the sale of National Amusements, now $1.75 billion. Also enhanced legal protections from lawsuits, possible shareholder lawsuits. The deal gives Paramount 45 days. I'm sure they will, to find a better offer or something.
Look, this is the first time they've actually announced it. Before, it's all just been, sources say, speculation around.
Yeah.
And this was a pretty big deal for the Redstone family to be able to say they have the legal protections, because it's pretty widely expected that there will be shareholder lawsuits.
Right.
You want to be protected from that if you're going to say, okay, go ahead with this deal. And yeah, 45 days means game on.
Shareholders feel like they weren't. I mean, whether they're getting a good deal now or not is one thing. I don't know what the best deal they could get is at this point. But just in general, over the past 5 years, it has not been handled.
It hasn't. But who was it? Rich Greenfield, who was talking to us about the idea that depending on who wins this next presidential election,
there, yeah.
maybe there's room for other partnerships and other deals to be taking place. They've got 45 days to come up with a better offer. We'll see what that leads to.
The EU's sweeping tech regulations have only been in full effect for a few months, but many of the largest tech companies are already in regulators' crosshairs. Yeah, we keep hearing different company every day, Steve.
Yeah, it's just this cascade of litigation and warnings coming at these. And look, these laws are called the Digital Markets and Digital Services Act, and they were designed basically to target the biggest companies in the world and do things like forcing Apple to allow third-party app stores or stricter content moderation guidelines for social media companies like Meta. And even though these companies have had years to figure out how to comply, well, the European Commission, which is enforcing these laws, says they're not doing enough. And violators, by the way, risk being fined up to 10% of global annual sales if they don't make the changes the EC is asking for. And right from the start, when these laws went into effect, the EC started investigating companies on compliance, and Apple seems to be getting the most scrutiny. There's been a flurry of pushback, though, from the EC in recent weeks. Just last month, Commission told Apple preliminary findings show Apple is violating part of the DMA that forces Apple to let apps work outside the App Store payment system. And on top of that, they're opening up a new inquiry into extra fees they're charging apps outside of the App Store. Meantime, Meta got a similar warning last week. The Commission said Meta's plan to charge users to avoid being tracked for advertising also violates the DMA. And then just on Friday, the EC asked Amazon for more information on its compliance with the DSA and how it recommends products on its platform. By the way, the DSA says companies like Amazon or Google can't favor their own products over third parties. And finally, we heard this on Friday. X is expected to get a formal notice soon that it's been violating content moderation rules under the DSA. That was according to a Bloomberg report. And look, it doesn't stop with these two big laws separate from the DMA and DSA. In late June, the EC told Microsoft it was being, quote, abusive by bundling the Teams app with other productivity apps it sells like Outlook and Word. And then Reuters reported just last week, French regulators are preparing to charge NVIDIA for antitrust violations related to the chips it makes for graphics processing and, of course, all that AI training. And when it comes to the next wave of tech, these rules are already having a chilling effect. Both Apple and Meta have said they're withholding launches of AI products until they're confident they can comply with the new laws, guys.
This drives me crazy.
I know. No, I just saw something earlier today. I was just looking forward to see where it was, but how there's a difference. There's statism over there, and there's innovation, which is here. But you know what? You don't really need innovation if you can sort of just.
That's one of the biggest criticisms of these laws is here's the EU is behind in protecting companies like Spotify, for example, and maybe even Epic Games, at the expense of the biggest, most profitable companies in the United States.
Why develop your own tech industry if you can just glom on and just...
But keep in mind, these are not new ideas, Joe. In fact, I mean, we haven't passed here in the United States similar legislation or anything even coming close to that. There's some antitrust cases working their way through the DOJ and FTC, but these ideas are not unique. It's just that the EU did it.
Like, you're going to do something and complain about fees here or there that add up, and you're worried about the competition on it. If you're really worried about something, why don't you do something about protecting children online? Nobody is doing that. If you're going to, you're not going to do anything to lift a finger to protect children online, but you're going to go after ridiculously stupid stuff like this and say that they're being abusive by bundling
teams
Word
with Word.
teams.
Yeah.
You've got to be kidding me.
And Becky, I agree. And that's not just a criticism for the EU. That's a criticism for our lawmakers
care about
here
all
too.
the wrong stuff.
We can't even pass protecting little girls online from feeling suicidal, and yet we talk so much about
little boys and little girls from adult predators.
That too. That's also a problem.
We don't care about anything that actually matters. We care about the stupid stuff that only hurts innovation.
And by the way, the tech companies have very little incentive to do anything about it. We've seen that over and over again, of the decisions they made behind the scenes not to make the changes to protect them. By the way, you know what Meta says now about the protection and stuff? They say that's Apple's problem and Google's problem. They run the app stores. We just run Instagram. We can't really do this ourselves. We need legislation.
Instagram's the biggest problem with teen girls feeling bad.
And then they ask for legislation. Every time legislation comes up, they try to water it down or kill it. So I don't take them seriously on that either. But this is a whole other thing. This is very real going on in the EU. And it's forcing Apple, which has been able to resist changes like this for so long. They're actually, just on Friday, Becky, Epic Games, the Fortnite company, they were trying to get their app store in the EU. They were denied twice for something kind of minor and petty, like their buttons look too similar to the buttons in the app store. And usually Apple would just block them and take that. Epic Games went public and Apple reversed course right away. So it is kind of forcing some changes from Apple. Whether or not you think that's right or appropriate is up for debate. But it is making Apple change its tune and these other companies, because in Apple's case, they could have $40 billion or more.
Apple protects my privacy.
That's the way a lot of people look at it too. But this affects Google, this affects Amazon, this affects Meta. X any day now is going to get that warning. So it's really hitting all these companies hard.
All right, thank you, Mr. GQ.
Mr. GQ.
Well, I mean, every day it's another. You've never worn the same thing twice.
Yeah, of course I have. You just don't notice.
I notice. Who notices more than me?
That's true. You comment almost every day I'm here.
I certainly do.
Yeah.
I certainly do.
But GQ, I'll take that.
Yeah, Mr. GQ.
It's the first time anyone's ever said that to me. I love that.
Now that kind of makes me sad. No one's ever said that to you, Steve?
Mr. GQ?
Your whole life never.
I'm not a fashionable person until they started dressing me. That's part of my job.
Yeah, okay.
Cheese will be next.
Still to come on Squawk Pod, what's next for President Biden after more than 50 years in public life? And what does this big week, hold in store for the Democratic Party? Axios co-founder Mike Allen on one version of Plan B. Vice President Kamala Harris possibly moving to the top of the ticket.
They would use a frame of prosecutor versus convict. She helps with young voters. She helps with the women voters who are swing voters.
This is Squawk Pod from CNBC. Today with Joe Kernan and Becky Quick.
President Biden in an interview on ABC that aired Friday.
I mean, if the Lord Almighty came down and said, Joe, get out of the race, I get out of the race, the Lord Almighty's not coming down.
Join us now to discuss the 2024 presidential race and increasing calls for Biden to quit his re-election campaign is Axios co-founder Mike Allen. It was a clinic, 22 minutes of how to ask the question, when are you leaving? Not one immigration question, not one question about anything other than you are too old and you need to leave. And a different, poor President Biden had to answer it in 22 different ways when it was all said and done. Was that a probing interview for you, Mike?
Well, Joe, I can tell you the donors that we talked to, lawmakers we talked to, say that how many questions there were, how many answers there were, they weren't sufficient. They were not satisfied with what President Biden had to say. Like, Joe, the sort of stages that we've heard donors and lawmakers go through, they were sort of shocked as they watched that interview. Then they were sad as it soaked in what was really going on with President Biden, who many of them have known back to his days as a senator, a chairman, a vice president. And now they're kind of mad. They feel that he is not acting on the signals he's getting. So, Joe, however bad the public conversation is for President Biden, I can tell you the behind the scenes, it's worse.
I didn't think he was that different in that interview than he has been in any of the interviews for the past year or two. That's why they should be mad at themselves, I think. The one guy who, when he said it, I knew it was true probably, Mike, was when Carville said that which can't continue won't. And that's a Herbstein quote. It's not a Ben Stein quote. Bueller. It's a different guy. This is a Herbstein quote. But I've always thought that, but watching it play out is painful. It's taken a while. Every day that it takes is a day that they're not talking about the insurrection or the felonies or the end of democracy as we know it. It's all about Joe Biden. And they're not going to let that continue much longer.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joe. Two things about that. One, for a long time, both Republicans and Democrats have said if this race is about Trump, he loses. If it's about Biden, he has a better chance to win. This race has been all about Biden. The Trump people have just been enjoying the week of coverage of that. And there's another time imperative here, Joe. So just a week from today, the Republican convention starts. The month after that, the Democratic convention starts. And so if Democrats are going to make a change in their nominee, and I can tell you that lots of donors that we talk to, senators, members of the House, expect that will happen. The way one top operative said it to us is every day that goes by is a disaster, that we expect that if it's not President Biden, we expect it would be Vice President Harris, and getting that in place, getting that going will take time. But the White House is playing for time. So they've announced a Thursday news conference at the end of a NATO summit, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday here in D.C. And then for next week, something that's very unusual, Joe, is they've announced the president's schedule 10 days out, which 10 days out, very unusual. The presidents could be in Texas and Nevada during the Republican convention, talking about civil rights, talking about unity in America. So the White House sending every external signal they can, full speed ahead.
Yes. I will say it's just watching it play out, Mike. The first couple of Congress, I guess it was both of them were congressmen, but they were, they are in Congress, but it wasn't like a leading, Nadler's they got now, I guess, but there's Hakeem, Speaker, has seemed relatively, or not Speaker, a minority leader, has seemed right. Sort of open. He hasn't condemned them, nothing from Schumer or Pelosi or any of the real, and then Mark Warner, right. So it became public, so he really, once it becomes public, he really can't continue to meet with other senators to see what to do. They're that feckless about facing the elephant in the room.
Yeah, Mike, well, the one thing I'll say is you hear people say publicly one thing, they say privately something else.
Very much so. Very much so, Becky. The way that one House Democrat said it to me is the SH will hit the fan today. So the members they were home for the 4th of July recess. So this has all been on text messages. Beginning today, for both the House and the Senate, it's in person. And that will be a very different chemistry, very different dynamic as they talk about their own races. They talk about Democrats hoping to keep the Senate, hoping to flip the House, and Democrats who are worried about the possibility that this is, for the reasons that you guys talked about at the top, giving Trump an edge, giving Trump a better chance. And so that's why things could move very quickly this week. That's why the White House is setting out those tent poles, saying, like, we're engaged, we have this important work to do. But those members who, you're right, all the leaders have been very cautious. So everybody's going to be looking for signals from them in the hours ahead.
For a while, I really thought I could feel it, that, that they were headed that way, and then, looking into the abyss of what would happen, and then seeing Vice President Harris and really coming to grips with what that would mean. What if it became clear, and I think probably a living, breathing individual, any living, breathing individual might be better for Democrats. I hate to say that, but it might be. But then again, they are going to be stuck with the realities of what a Vice President Harris is at the top of the ticket. They're going to be stuck with what that would mean. And I'm wondering when they suddenly say, "Oh my God, we're getting what we wish for. Are we sure we want this?"
I talked to a Harris supporter who talked me through a very specific plan for her to run. So she, of course, was a prosecutor, elected DA in San Francisco, was the attorney general in my native state, California. So they would use a frame of prosecutor versus convict, Harris versus Trump. And she helps the Democratic ticket with young voters. She helps with the women voters who are swing voters. So there is a plan to show her strengths if she goes to the top of the ticket.
Exactly. I know I can see it building, and I can see how they're going to frame it and everything else. I'm just not sure whether that's going to be widely adopted among voters, whether it's a widely adopted.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say you're not the target audience.
I'm not the what? Oh, the
target audience for that message.
For that message.
And like another point they make is that with her at the top of the ticket, also Roe instantly, the fall of Roe instantly goes to the center of the conversation, which is something that Democrats have been pushing for the way behind the scenes. The second gentleman, her husband, Doug Emhoff, has put it, is Dobbs and democracy, the Supreme Court decision.
Right. But you figure it will be her. There's no way to go around her, even with whatever they're talking about.
So Joe, that's super interesting. And that's another sign of the weakness of President Biden is a lot of the big donors that I've been talking to, a lot of your viewers, frankly, they're already moved ahead and they're debating whether it's better for President Biden to endorse Vice President Harris at the top, or whether there should be some kind of a process in the race before the Democratic convention starts in Chicago on August 19th. So one idea that's out there that's been talked about at the highest levels of Congress is, could you have some regional debates, mini primaries, a term has been out there, where delegates, the Democratic delegates from the Southwest, the Northeast, the West, the Mountain West, get together and basically audition really quick the governors that would want to run, the senators that would want to run Vice President Harris. And of course, a big problem with that plan is A, there's literally no time. But B, like, how do you figure out who's on that stage?
Right.
I don't recommend they try to go around her. I really do not. And especially the high-minded Democrats, the high-minded woke Democrats. Good luck with that. But I said I'm going to buy a popcorn machine.
Axios, Vice President Harris's epic advantage for the exact reasons you're talking about.
Exactly. If they try and do that, like I said, I'm not just buying some popcorn, I'm buying a popcorn machine, because I'm going to just sit back and watch that, because they're going to eat them from the inside out. They'll eat themselves alive. Thank you, Mike. Good to see you.
Have a great week.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, tailwinds for Corning Glass, a company founded in 1851. They made the glass for Edison's light bulbs and your grandma's kitchen. Corning CEO Wendell Weeks on making technology work now.
Because we're seeking to fit 10 times the amount of connections in the same space. And that's what we've done. We've invented new fibers, new cables.
Corning, an AI winner, right after this. Welcome back to Squawk Pod.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue, please.
You are watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan. Andrew is off today. Materials supplier Corning raising its second quarter guidance this morning. It now says it's expecting core sales of $3.6 billion. That compares to a previous guidance of $3.4 billion. It's also expecting core EPS at the high end or slightly above management's guided range of 42 to 46 cents. And it's largely driven by acceleration in AI. Joining us right now to explain is Wendell Weeks. He's the chairman and CEO of Corning. And Wendell, thank you for coming in.
Always a pleasure, Becky.
So this is big news, and you can see the stock up by more than 7% this morning. In fact, if it opens here, it'll be the highest level that we've seen Corning shares in close to 2.5 years. What's happening in AI? Because I'm not sure everyone understands the connection between Corning Glass and AI.
So generative AI needs a second back-end network in data centers. And in this network, each GPU is connected to every other GPU in the cluster. This creates the so-called neural network that you hear about. It happens to be that requires about 10 times the number of fiber connections in this network versus a traditional data center.
Because AI needs so much more computing power, so many more processes that have to take
And
place.
most importantly, so many more connections, because that's how you create the neural network. Each GPU is connected to each other, all with fiber. And so this not only creates more volume for us, which is great, but it also creates the opportunity for more innovation, because we're seeking to fit 10 times the amount of connections in the same space. And that's what we've done. We've invented new fibers, new cables, new connectors, and new custom integrated optical solutions to dramatically reduce installation costs, reduce overall time, reduce space, and reduce carbon footprint. And it is the rapid adoption of these new innovations that drove our outperformance.
Who do you work with? You work with the data centers, you work with NVIDIA. How do you kind of have those customer connections?
So all of the above depends on the time frame. The major cloud operators and data center operators, of course, but also other major players in the ecosystem, because we're the connectivity that brings the hardware to life.
What have you seen that led you to raise guidance? What's happening specifically?
Well, we put together a plan we call our springboard plan, which shows that we have both cyclical and secular trends converging that should add around $3 billion in annualized sales within the next 3 years to Corning. Because we already have the production capacity in place and the technical capabilities, and those costs are already in our financials, we should generate really powerful profit and cash flow on that revenue growth. This springboard plan is happening as we speak. Q1 was our low, and our preliminary guidance and our preliminary update shows our revenue growing 10% and our EPS growing more than 20% sequentially. So we're off to a terrific start.
How much of that is AI? How much of that is other cyclical issues?
Well, AI drove the outperformance. We're also seeing strong secular trends in our other market access platforms, be it in other pieces of optical communications, in display, in
Gorilla
auto,
Glass. Yeah,
right,
and things
and
that
the
can
like.
do. So a strong global economy that took off. Last year was a rougher year for Corning, and part of that was, I believe, the supply chain issues that had caught up. Explain what was happening then and what has since changed.
Well, our revenues were down because our markets were down. Our markets were down largely because of supply chain corrections, different behavior sets driven by the pandemic, as well as macroeconomic factors. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing a beginning of a reversal of those cyclical trends. But more important for us are the secular trends. We don't count on people buying more stuff. We count on people buying more Corning in the products they buy. Auto is a great example. Since 2017, the amount of vehicles being sold in the auto market are down about 5%. Our revenues are up 70% as car companies adopt our new innovations to help support cars that are more connected, that are cleaner, that are more autonomous.
What about things like we can try and read into, let's say, iPhone sales with Gorilla Glass?
So the overall phone market has been relatively flattish over the last few years. Of course, generative AI offers the opportunity to cause a significant refresh cycle in hardware. That's how we'll all interface one way or the other with generative AI. So we would expect that to come back.
What's the biggest challenge you face right now, Wendell?
For us right now, it has been that we were patiently investing, for instance, almost 4 years in these new generative AI products. And when the macroeconomics aren't great, it always is harder to sustain that commitment. And so that's what we've done. So it's delightful to be here today and actually see when innovations work out.
And you expect that this is going to be 3 years in the making? You're 1 year into a 3-year plan?
Yes, we're sort of 1 quarter into a 3-year plan, and we expect our strength to only grow.
Well, the stock today up by 7.3%. Wendell, I know you don't speak very frequently, but we appreciate your coming into Squawk Box today and spending some time with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And that is Squawk Pod for today. Thanks for listening this Monday after the July 4th weekend. And thank you for starting off your new week with us. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern to get the smartest takes and analysis from our TV show, all 3 hours of it, right into your ears in an easy-to-listen-to podcast form. Well, follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you're listening now. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.